I'm like, wait a second, didn't I just talk to you a few weeks ago? He is not Worshipful Brother Nathan Chick. This is Worshipful Brother Ted Cross. Welcome to the Craftsmen Online podcast.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
It's not that you and Nathan look the same, and you don't sound the same either, but on my screen, and for those watching on YouTube Live, they can see the streaming feed, your background very similar. And then when we started talking about Arizona, I was like, wait a second, didn't I just talk to you? So you do work with Nathan. There is a connection here.
Yep. Nathan works at Arizona State University, and I work at Arizona State University as well. I lead character education across the university, and I'm a professor of practice in the College of Humanities. And Nathan teaches in the School of Historical, Religious, and Philosophical Studies. I think I got that right.
Wow, that's a lot. Okay. And do you guys ever cross paths at work, or is it just in Lodge?
Justin Lodge. He has presented at Ascension Art Lodge a number of times, and he also works with Tria Prima Press, which put out his book, and also Jamie Paul Lamb, who is also in that group.
Gotcha. See, you can see where the circle of trust is here. But it's
Yep.
also interesting because I say this all the time. You know, we will get into talking about the science of happiness and meaning. That's why Worshipful Brother Cross is here. But it's fascinating to me, this circle of life, and how in Freemasonry, I mean, you work with Worshipful Brother Schick on campus. Paths don't really cross there, but they cross in a Masonic lodge. And you're like, wow, I'm in this fraternity of like-minded men, and I get to meet all of these people that even if I work on the same grounds or in the same town or live in the same area, I never would come across them in everyday life. It's awesome.
Yeah, that is one of the advantages, right, of Freemasonry being what sociologists call a third space, a place that it isn't work and it isn't home, and where like-minded people can gather and share ideas. There's even theories going back to, well, the 1700s, that one of the reasons the Enlightenment accelerated was because of coffee houses starting to show up and Masons getting together. And of course, we know that the first lodges were held in taverns, and there's probably a practical and I would say functional reason for that. It brings
Mm.
people together who wouldn't normally get together.
Right. These are like-minded men, and it leads perfectly into our discussion here, the science, those seeking happiness and meaning. You gave us your background as far as being a teacher or a professor at, unfortunately, Arizona State University. I'm not going to hold that against you as a U of A
U of
alum.
A.
But when did you first make the, I like to ask, like the Masonic connection between your personal life and these studies and maybe a lesson or a part of our ritual or the degrees that you're like, interesting. There's a happiness meaning here with Freemasonry too.
Well, my journey into Freemasonry is a bit unique. So I am a Mormon, and I was going to graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania, and there's lodges everywhere there. And I had thought back, when I was 19 years old, the Mormon church sent me on a mission to Brazil. And I was down in Brazil for 2 years, and all these prominent guys were giving me handshakes that I recognized, um, having been an initiated Mormon in the Mormon temple. And so I was a little curious about that. And so once I got to Philadelphia, I sought out a lodge, and it was a small lodge, Hiram number 81 in Chestnut Hill, Philadelphia. It's now called Mitchell Lodge, something or other, and joined a great group of brothers there in Philadelphia. And really, for me, it was um, one, wanting to understand the deeper symbolism of Freemasonry that also, frankly, is transported into the Mormon tradition, but also wanting to get outside of my regular group of friends, my bubble that was, everyone talked about the same things, thought the same things, and how could I get with some other people to hear some new ideas beyond the university that I was attending. And I thought Freemasonry would be a great place to have some of that intergroup contact and learn from others. That lodge that I joined was predominantly populated by Jewish brothers, and so I got to learn a lot. One of the first gifts that they gave me was the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and said, hey, take a look at this chapter and this chapter related to our ritual, and it was exciting to be able to learn from others, things I never would have encountered if I would have stayed within my normal social group.
Wow. No, I think this is a great testimony for if we have an interested gentleman who's listening to the podcast and like, I've been thinking about wanting to do this. It's interesting because each of us approach a Masonic lodge or even the beginning of our Masonic journey from different angles, right?
Yep.
And then there's that thing that calls us and draws us near. And then we meet this whole host of like other people that have this tremendous impact on our lives. We're going to get into that a little bit here with your presentation on the meaning of science and happiness, especially as it relates to Freemasonry. One of the things you can help me out with is you open up with an introduction on the PERMA model.
Yes.
What is that? And how does it kind of serve as a backbone of like what helps us feel happiness?
Well, the background first is these ideas are coming out of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, particularly Aristotle's conception of what happiness is, and it is translated as happiness, but the Greek word is eudaimonia, and if you want to break that down to what it literally means, it means having the good spirit, or if you want to get more esoteric about it, it means having the good demon. Demon neither meant negative or positive. Anciently, was just having a good spirit. And it's more than happiness. It's not happiness has a couple things inside of it. One, the root word of happiness is the same root word of happenstance. So there's some sort of luck involved if you're happy. And scientifically, in positive psychology, which is where I come out of, happiness is an affective description. So it's how you feel when you have good feelings. But what Aristotle and others meant by eudaimonia is something more akin to flourishing, like as a plant would flourish. So this involves, yes, having happy feelings, but also having a bunch of other components that make up what a happy or good life would look like. And that brings us to this idea of the PERMA model. And this is invented by Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania. He's known as the father of positive psychology. And I was introduced to it first. My wife and I were living in Philadelphia. I was going to Penn. She was working at the Templeton Foundation at the time. And she said, "We need to go to this dinner, work dinner." I said, "Okay." I said, "What is it about?" She said, "We're funding this guy's research on happiness."
Hmm.
And I got to meet Martin Seligman for the first time. This was, almost 20 years ago. And started to ask him a few questions and got very interested in his work and started reading some of his material, particularly this book. It's called Authentic Happiness. If any of the listeners want to look that up. And
Bonus points for
inside,
the visual aids for the YouTube live streamers too. Good job with
okay, yes, no problem.
that.
And so basically, what Seligman, and he was the former president of the American Psychological Association, and he said, "We've done a great job of making miserable people less miserable." So that's good and laudable. We've done a lot of good stuff with therapies and medications and stuff like that. But what about taking people from uh, -1 to +3 on the
Mm.
happiness scale, if you will, right? And that psychology should be more than just about pathology, what's wrong with you, but how can we scientifically study and quantify the best parts of the human experience? That's Tal Ben Shahar from Harvard. That's the way he describes it. So Seligman came up with a model to encompass flourishing, not just happiness, not just how we feel, and it's called this PERMA model. It's PERMA, and P stands for positive emotions. So that's what we would think of about happiness. How do we feel? Uh, E is for engagement. So you have to have some sort of engagement in your life. It can be anything from a hobby. Seligman describes his obsession with playing competitive bridge competitions. You may know folks who are really into gaming of some kind. There's some sort of engagement piece in your life. R stands for positive relationships. And M stands for meaning, so finding meaning in your life and your work. And A stands for accomplishment. Um,
Mm,
are you feeling like that you are progressing some way in your life? Now, the interesting thing about Freemasonry is it allows you to have some sort of progression by degree or
yep.
chair by chair or a pendant body by a pendant body that allows for some intrinsic and extrinsic motivation for achievement while not simultaneously tying it all up into your career, which
Yep.
is what we do in the West, right? Like, well, I hit middle manager and I'm 56 and that's all I'm going to get to. Now I'm depressed because my achievement has slowed down here, right? Now, PERMA model has also been modified recently to add H to the end, which is health. Um, and this is sort of, we thought was sort of obvious.
Yeah.
If your health is pretty poor, it's hard to be flourishing. Though the studies of people with chronic illnesses or who are diagnosed with chronic illnesses shows that when they're first diagnosed, their effective happiness goes down a lot, but
Yep.
they habituate over time, and it goes back to sort of like their set level, normal level.
Well, it's so interesting because as with a healthcare background, I'm like, I'm glad you added the H to that because now the focus is on the holistic approach to patients, not just going in for a symptom or one condition, but treating the whole person.
Right.
And it's also fascinating to me when you talk about meaning, and this has been like an underlying theme, I think, on the podcast with several of our guests, but also just in writing is the whole male loneliness epidemic that is existing out there. And it got me thinking to the specific interested gentlemen who come to Masonic lodges, and it's a variation, I would say, of the same answer to the same question, which is, why are you interested in Freemasonry? They're looking for some sort of purpose. They want to have a meaningful life. They're looking for a better group of men to be
That's
around.
right.
And you've touched on all of those with those points. So is that kind of where our phrase of making good men better, I guess that is perma friendly. It works.
Yeah, that's where I started thinking about this, you know, trained as an academic in this field. I wrote my dissertation on something called grit, which is like true grit. That's a passion and persistence for long term goals. But when I started zooming out a bit and then seeing the connections between Freemasonry and sort of living the good life, if you would like it, and especially since we have the four cardinal virtues, for instance, in our second degree, there starts to be some real overlap. And you're right, the motto of making good men better, the
Mm,
question for me was, well, how are we actually doing that? How are we actually delivering on that brand promise, if you will, that we will make good men better? And a lot of the things that we do, such as you've been mentioning, relationships with men of quality, men that you might not have met before, that social connections and social networking that happens that is very helpful can be found in other organizations like the Rotary Club or some the Elks or something else. So then my next question always is, well, what makes Freemasonry different than those? And we can get into that, I think, second half of our discussion. But there is, my argument is there's an exoteric part of the equation of making good men better, which we're going to talk about through the positive psychology lens. And then there's that esoteric version of making good men better with the
mm,
internal work that we do that involves not religion, as we always say, but spiritual growth and
yeah.
some form of encountering transcendent experiences.
Mm. Another bonus, first guest to give a long tease on the podcast of what is to come next.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing we're about to enter into the area here, Worshipful Brother Cross, on, as my dad used to say in his generation, money can't buy you happiness. He used to say, but it can buy you the things that make you happy. Today we live in this like instant gratification world where we see it now as master masons. You'll have a new guy that comes and he wants to give the petition, he wants to get all the degrees, and he wants to be in the club, so to speak. And you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. There's a staggered approach. There's a
Yeah.
timeline here. It's totally worth it. So in your opinion, how do we learn the difference, the healthy difference between happiness and satisfaction? And why is it important to know that there's a difference between these two things?
Well, one is to know that effective happiness, meaning the way you feel at any given moment, is fleeting, and we want to increase positive emotions. But if we're only chasing positive emotions, we get on something that the philosophers called the hedonic treadmill. So hedonism was all about, chasing after the next pleasurable thing, but it's
Mm.
a treadmill because once you get to that pleasurable goal, it's unsatisfying. And so you're going for the next thing and you're stuck running after the next thing and the next thing. So that's the first thing to mention. But I also say that life satisfaction is more about uh, how satisfied are you with your life. And I would say it's easier to do looking backwards than forwards. So how satisfied do you feel just with your life, whether or not you're feeling happy at any given moment? Are you feeling satisfied? And it's more of a cognitive judgment of how satisfied you are as your life as a whole. Now, what they found, and to your question, this is one of the reason I often bring this up at the beginning is, can money buy me happiness? Right?
Mm.
That's a question, and the answer is yes, to a certain extent. Now, the studies they've done on these can money buy you happiness are like 10 years old now, so we need to adjust these amounts I'm about to say for inflation. But 10 years ago, they said some famous researchers did find that once you get to an income level, depending on where you live, like if you're living in Washington, D.C., where you are, the number is going to be a lot higher than if it's in Arizona, where I live, somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000 a year 10 years ago. Now let's adjust that up, right? I'm making up numbers now. Let's say it's 150 to 250 or something like that. Once you hit those points, your effective happiness sort of levels off. So
Mm.
your good feelings, the hedonic treadmill effect, doesn't work anymore. Um, but life satisfaction scores actually continue to rise the more money you make because you feel more accomplished and more satisfied. So it's a nuanced answer I just gave you, which is you're not going to feel any better, but you might appraise that your life is more successful and you're more satisfied with it the more money you make, which is often um, a confusing route for people because they are chasing the good feeling part, the effective happiness, and then they're going to hit a plateau and be very disappointed that they're not feeling any better. And now they need to work on meaning and some of these
Mm.
other things instead.
So they're kind of connected, the two. Like you can be happy, but it doesn't mean anything to you because it's just a temporary, fleeting thing. You
That's
can
right.
feel like you have meaning in your life, but if it's not long term or shared with others, you're just not going to feel the genuine happiness. You're always going to be seeking that feeling. Am I hearing this right?
Yeah, it's more like flourishing's the goal,
Mm.
and these perma components are uh, components. They're pieces that can help make a more well-rounded, flourishing life.
Hmm.
So if you have no positive emotions in your life, it's going to be really hard to have a flourishing sort of lifestyle. But if you only focus on the pursuit of not by the way, our founders, I just been working with Jeffrey Rosen at the National Constitution Center. The phrase "pursuit of happiness" did not mean feeling good; it meant being good.
Mm.
That's what they meant. They meant the classical sense of being good. Sure, you want to have some of these, pleasurable experiences, but they've done studies, for example, that after the first four spoonfuls of ice cream, the pleasurable effect has a diminishing return, right? Like, so
Right.
that we don't just want to focus on that. We want to make sure that we're also including engagement and relationships and meaning and achievement, and to your point, health undergirding that in some way.
Yeah.
Most of the interventions that you would know that can instantly change people's life is exercise. Well, that's boring, but it's the truth,
Right.
right?
Right. Well, it's interesting too because we're just coming out of at the time of this podcast recording. George Wendt, the actor who played Norm from
Right.
Cheers, and we're probably dating ourselves a little bit with some of this generation, but he was well known for walking in and always being offered a beer and saying, "Hey, why not?" And that's where he found his happiness was in beer. And it's interesting because we use that term in a modern sense, but really joy is probably the better expression of how we feel about certain things. Because, as you said, happiness is kind of raising yourself up, which goes to, again, congratulations being the first guest to ever long tease themselves, the conversation you wanted to have about exoteric or external factors and then internal
Yes.
inherent factors of what can help, where we can seek happiness to then find that meaning connection.
Well, since I've often taught in business schools, I like to think of things as through a Pareto analysis, an 80-20 Pareto analysis. What's the least amount of work to get the most results? And when I look at the PERMA model, I say you should probably focus on relationships and meaning. So this is the exoteric conversation. And if you look back at those clips that have been going around on social media about Norm and the last scene of Cheers, where he
Mm-hmm.
says, I love beer and that's why I come here. That's actually not the real answer. The real answer is in the beginning intro song of Cheers, that I want to go where everyone knows my name. It's a community component. And so the reason why those folks are gathering in this third space, as I mentioned again, and why Freemasons probably gathered in taverns as well at the beginning, it's a third place where it's safe to express different ideas and make friends. So when I look at the PERMA model, I'm looking for my 80-20 analysis, and I would say practically, if you want to get the most out of this model, focus on relationships and focus on meaning.
Mm.
And Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia, in his famous book Redirect, he sort of summarized all the literature on happiness and flourishing. He says the number one predictor of how happy people are is the quality of their social relationships. So work on our, if we want to be happy and have a flourishing life, uh, relationships is the number one thing, and it also matters for longevity as well. There's studies that show, they did a longitudinal study over 10 years. They wanted to see who was alive at the end of 10 years and what factors predicted that. And the top two were social integration, which means, do I know my pharmacist? Do I know my neighbor? That was the number one predictor of whether or not someone would be alive in 10 years when they started this study. The
Mm.
second one was close relationships, no surprise, because we just talked about that. And then three, four, and five were sort of interesting but obvious, like quit smoking, quit drinking, and get a flu vaccine. And so it's like, I would expect, quit smoking to be number one, but it's not. It's about, for health, even, it's about sociality. And you mentioned, for example, this loneliness pandemic, post pandemic, and in the pandemic, especially for men. And what's this isolation is causing a ton of mental health issues. So masonry can help with that. And I would just also suggest that, the old book Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam.
Putnam,
It's the
yeah.
25th anniversary, and they just did a documentary on his work called Join or Die that talks about fraternal and civic organizations. And in his revised edition, he says, I'm just going to give you a quote from him. He says, mounting evidence suggests that people whose lives are rich in social capital do better with traumas and fight illness more effectively. So join something, be part of something, right?
Yeah, personally, I'm on a campaign right now. This is where the hill that I will die on. I think every lodge needs to. I'm sure a member has a Netflix account. We can all share the password, but we should all get together and watch that together as a lodge, and then talk about
Yes.
our experiences together in Freemasonry. So that's Join or Die. It's on Netflix. It's the first time I'm going to tell you to go watch Netflix instead of being in lodge.
That's right. That's right. It's great. It's a great film. And when they first released it, you could not watch it unless you had a watching party together. That was first phase. Second phase, you could watch it together online, and now it's available freely to the public. So they were actually practicing what they were preaching, which I thought was really, really nice. Of course, this is another practical benefit of being together with people is um, job networking. I know we're not supposed to be, enlodged to
Hmm.
make monies or whatever, but the studies show that you get new jobs from a friend of a friend, or loose ties, as they call it in
Or,
sociology.
or as we close the full circle loop, you get to connect with people who literally are on the same college campus as you that you'd walk by, park next to, see in the
Yep,
lunchroom, but never approach.
that's
Um,
right.
I want to talk about a couple of other points that you touch on in your presentation on good men being better, as we talk about the science behind happiness and meaningness. And you talk about the benefits of journaling. This is something that I've started to do on my phone, because the new iPhone app, I think it's just called Journal. You can actually lock these thoughts, so you don't have to worry about your wife or your kids, who may even know your password, being able to get to this. Um, can you talk a little bit about like how journaling is effective, and how to do it more effectively, and part of the process of our pursuit of happiness or to happiness?
Well, one of the number one interventions that has robust evidence behind it is gratitude journaling. So if you want to feel more grateful, uh, write down things every day that you're grateful for. And if you find yourself falling into the trap that you're like bored writing lists of things you're grateful for, or you start thinking, oh, well, look at all these things I earned myself and I'm grateful for them. There's another a protocol where they ask you, instead of just writing what you're grateful for every day, write sort of the miraculous things that happened to you that day or in your life. Things that were undeserved, if you will, that you have observed in your life, like a chance meeting with someone, or I didn't get hit by the bus, that when I was crossing the street,
Right.
or these things that were not in my control, but that I'm even more grateful for. They found that that is even more effective of a
Mm.
protocol to use in a gratitude journaling space. There's also some other things, like if you're struggling with depression or anxiety, they're called the Pennebaker writing prompts. Those are by James Pennebaker, and they've been found. You can look them up. There's various prompts, and you can use those in journaling to be able to act. They found that sometimes they're just as effective as some therapies, like going to therapy.
I could see that. Yeah, yeah. And one of the things I like about the iPhone app, not like I'm trying to plug it or anything, or push this on our listener, but I do it frequently. And what I find fascinating about it is it's kind of tied into your calendar and other
Yeah,
communications that you have with people. So it will prompt you. And if there's really nothing going on in your life that you want to specifically journal on, these are great ways to kind of recall, like, oh my gosh, this is what the biggest thing was on my mind back in February of this year, and imagine where I'm thinking about things that are important now. And it
yeah,
is neat to go back and see, as you said, it's kind of like that self progressive work that you would do.
achievement. Yeah.
Yeah, like how did I overcome that? And wow, that was such a big hurdle or challenge for me at that time. And I did it. And now I'm on to this other thing. And I can't wait to see 6 months from now where I'm going to be in life.
That's right. And in America, Dan McAdams, who's the sort of father of narrative psychology at Northwestern, he may have moved somewhere else by now, but he says in America we love a redemptive narrative. So, like you're talking about, there's my grandparents came from nothing. Now we've redeemed ourselves that way, or sort of if you think about the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell type of stuff. Novice encounters something hard, and there's a tragedy, and there's a low point, usually a double low point, as Kurt Vonnegut would say, and then there's the rising action at the end, right?
Hmm.
And so writing things down is it's really important because it helps us to, well, as Timothy Wilson say, rewrite our own personal identity,
Mm.
right? Because we have these stories running in our heads all these times. They call it self-talk in psychology, but the idea is why don't you write down, and there's another prompt called the best possible self prompt. It's a protocol for 1 week where you write about what would your best possible self be,
Hmm.
and that has been shown to increase happiness, meaning, and well-being overall as well.
Interesting. Very, yeah, that gives me something to think about. Let me jot that prompt down. I want to close out with this last question because you kind of wrap up your presentation with a real focus on relationships. And to me, relationships are the most important things in my life, not the actual physical, my car, any prized possessions. It's the moments and the meaningful people that are like in my circle of trust and my circle of love that just they mean the most to me, and that's what makes me happy. That's what drives my joy. However, we live in this world which you have, congratulations, now joined this list of people that I've made a connection with or even interacted with, but in a digital or virtual space.
Yep.
And what is the challenge, and how are there healthy ways to pursue these kind of relationships with this technology? And is there anything that you see in this new space that's promising or even exciting?
I think it's very exciting. I'm very pro online, digital, even probably more optimistic than most about AI and what's coming for us, or is already here. Um, but that said, there is no replacement for some face-to-face interaction. There's just something different about that.
Mm,
Um, so, Robin Dunbar, he's the famous researcher out of the UK who talks about friendship, and he came up with Dunbar's number, which says that humans evolutionarily we can't handle more than 150 relationships, and um, there's really only maybe, let's say, 10 people that you can be kind of close with.
yeah.
And there's only really one person you can be really intimate relationship with. And so fostering those are important, and those have to be nurtured. So could it be through a digital means, that daily contact that is needed to maintain the relationship of an intimate partner? Yes, it could be, but it's probably better that some of these things happen. If you just think about the lodge structure, like, or even most religions, uh, over time, there's a reason we as humans have figured out if we get together once a week or once a month, we can sort of keep our social ties pretty strong. Longer than that, you start to dissipate a bit. So
Mm.
I would say you can supplement. Um, a majority of my meetings, of course, are on Zoom, as yours are, or others, but intentionally make what I would call punctuated in-person meetings a real priority.
Mm. One follow-up question on that, because I'm sure there's people that are listening and going, "Oh, well, this could be easier for some and harder for others."
Yeah,
Like myself, I'm a natural extrovert, which makes me
yeah.
a fantastic brother and Mason because I can easily walk into a room and make friends with people. Other folks, introverts, may struggle with this. Does that mean that those that have a harder time making relationships are going to have a more narrow or challenging path to finding happiness and meaning?
So the interesting thing is that Adam Grant from the Wharton School of Business has been commenting on the misunderstanding of what an extrovert and introvert is. I'm actually an introvert, as I'm an introvert that has learned to be an extrovert to make it in the world, if you will. And the distinction usually described between extroverts and introverts is extroverts get their energy from being around people and talking to people, and introverts get their energy by being more solitude and those kinds of things. But the actual answer is what the research says, it's the number of people you're around. So everybody, extrovert or introvert, needs some sociality, if you will. It's
Mm.
just that if I go to Costco on Saturday, uh, that drains my energy real quick,
Me too.
right? Right. So,
There's a lot of things I'd rather do. Stand in line at the DMV, for example, than go to Costco on Saturday or Sunday. No.
that's right. Exactly. Exactly. So for introverts, it's not that they will have a harder time is that they need to curate who is that very small group of people they want to interact with on a regular basis.
Mm.
Whereas extroverts would be more happy with interacting with large groups of people more often than an introvert would.
Hmm. Okay, I said I had one last question, but this one I'll make sure it's the last one. Just because with this discussion, we keep opening up another portal. I'm like, oh, another thought here. So I'm a big point within a circle guy. We're going to get a little esoteric. It's a symbol that gets introduced at the end of the intro to apprentice degree and kind of gets buried with a bunch of other things you hear about how lodges are formed and kind of a little bit of a history of Freemasonry. And I love it. And my one of the many interpretations of the point within a circle is as we learn about us being in the center of the point and the circle is our relationships with other people is, and it always gets a laugh when I give this presentation or say this line in lodges, is that some guys have bigger circles than other guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some people are more open and some are, and it's important on us as Freemasons when we interact with other brothers to recognize that and also to understand that the point isn't always sometimes directly in the center of the circle. Some people could be closer to one edge or further to the other. So I can see on YouTube like you're shaking your head. So pick up from there. Like where do you go with this in the point within the circle?
Well, I would say it's many points within many circles, even in the same lodge, right? So, and I think one of the jobs of the senior warden, in particular, sometimes the worshipful master, but senior warden in particular, is to match make friends inside of a lodge. It's also interesting that I belong to a lodge that has a cap on the number of members we will ever allow to be in, and that they made it up before I joined, of course, but that is based on sort of this research from Dunbar that if you want to have, he has 3 levels: intimate friends, close friends, best friends, good friends, and friends is what he says. Uh, the good friends level includes everything else above is about 30 people. So, I belong to big lodges and those are fine, but then there needs to be a concerted effort to create affinity groups or something inside of those huge lodges.
Mm-hmm.
I work at a very large institution, university I work at, and we found ways to make smaller groups inside of a large organization. And I think that's really important. So I would say my interpretation is yes, it could be that the point is leaning over towards one side of that circle, but maybe it's lots of points and lots of circles in a big Venn diagram.
I dig that. I really dig that. Worshipful Brother Ted Cross, thanks for the extra time, by the way. I appreciate that. I know we had some time slotted out. Please be sure to give my love to Worshipful Brother Nathan Schick on campus. Sparky, is that the mascot for ASU? Yeah. Do you happen to know the U of A's mascot name?
Well, I don't, but I know that they have the Wildcats, but they also have a bear, which I don't understand.
So. Oh my gosh. No, we don't have Bear Down is our it's Wilbur the Wildcat. We'll have a side conversation on Bear Down. Okay. But thank you so much again for your time and for being on this episode of the Craftsmen Online podcast.
Glad to. Thanks.